Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Solar Sessions, the Solar Power Europe webinar series. Thanks for joining with such a high numbers. I can see people coming in to the webinar as we speak. We expect good registrations. That's probably because we are touching upon an important topic. We'll be talking about solar manufacturing in Europe. And present to you a study that we did recently, a couple of weeks, together with the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Research. The context for that is that the European Union has two targets that directly relate to solar. One target relates to deployment of solar. We need to reach 750 gigawatts of solar installed by 2030. And the other target refers to manufacturing. We need to reshore 30 gigawatts of manufacturing to the EU. And those two targets are what I would call like the guiding star, the Northern Star for Solar Power Europe, and finding the balance and advancing both of these equally important targets is what steers Solar Power Europe strategy every day. So that's why we're going to do the study on manufacturing, and we're doing this webinar now to present this to you. The Net Zero Industry Act has been a massive step forward, a European framework for manufacturing. But the question is, of course, will it deliver? And at what cost? That is the subject of the study, and we will present it to you now, together with a wonderful panel and a full program, I should say as well. So if you go to the next slide, you will see the agenda of the day. I will hand over the words in a minute to Sebastian Nolt from Fraunhofer, who will be presenting the reports and with whom we've been cooperating to get these reports over the line. And then afterwards, my colleague Annette Ludwig, the head of supply chains here at Solar Power Europe, will be leading and moderating the panel discussion. The panel consists of a high quality and very diverse set of voices. First, from the institutions, the European Commission, Mr. Jacek Trudzinski, head of unit, acting head of unit at DG GROW. And from the Italian government, Mr. Alessandro Noce, who is the Director General of Energy Markets at the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security. We will, of course, also have representation from the solar sector, 3 in total, 2 of which are solar manufacturers, starting with Nicolas Chandelier, CEO of Carbon Solar, and Michele Pori, Head of Business Development and Marketing at Treesun under the NL Group. And of course, also on the solar developer side, Mr. Frederik Andren Sandberg, Head of Regulatory Affairs at RWE Renewables. Please note that there is also time, hopefully, for a Q&A, or at least the option is there. The Q&A is a box you can find on the screen at the bottom. Please don't hesitate to share your question. My colleague Annette will do her best to make sure there is time to address those questions. And to the extent we can do that, or not entirely, during this webinar, your questions will be picked up and we will follow up on those after the webinar. Voila, that's it from my side. It will be a fun 90 minutes. I would say sit back and relax, enjoy the session. And Sebastian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dries, for the kind introduction. I'll give you a presentation of the study we did jointly with Solar Power Europe on reshoring PV manufacturing to Europe. Which we presented first at the EU PV-SEC. And now I'll give you a shorter version of the presentation today, which we will first go over the solar PV market analysis, then show you an impact of finance push, demand pull measures, then a more detailed cost gap assessment of potential reshoring paths to Europe, and ending in the summary and takeaways. starting with the global PV market analysis. This is a very nice publication on a map you see on the left side, showing that solar PV is getting the cheapest source of electricity manufacturing globally. So we're getting, by the end of the decade, solar PV will be the cheapest source in almost all of the country in the world. And we also have seen and constantly see the PV module demand growing globally. On the left side, you see a forecast of Solar Power Europe of the global PV module demand, and it's expected to slow down a bit. We will see. I mean, there are new markets emerging if this will still be the case, but we'll have a global annual demand of currently around 700 and going above a terawatt annually by 2030. The global demand is mostly absorbed in China, more than 50%, but more and more regions in the world are also growing with their installation, as you see in the graph on the right side. At the same time, the global production share, and I want to draw your attention first on the circles to the right side. This is a map and installation of the global production capacity in 2024. And you see in the red circles on the right side that over 80% of the silicon PV chain, it's a little bit more diverse in the thin film supply chain, but the silicon PV chain is fully dominated by China, with a few other countries. And on the left side, you see a global map, which was developed by NREL with data from BNEF, that there are some other manufacturing locations, but here we have excluded China. Otherwise, the bars would be very, very small. And you see there are global manufacturing regions in Southeast Asia. Many Chinese manufacturers have established manufacturing hubs there. And there is some activity left in Europe. We'll go into that, but more activity in Turkey. Especially, I want to draw the attention to India and also to the United States, which have established manufacturing scheme to reshore manufacturing to these regions. Now we come into Europe. On the right side, you see a map from where ESA is constantly drawing the attention to what is happening in Europe. We see there's still a lot of module manufacturers, which are these greenish circles, but they're all with small capacity. We have no cell production capacity left in Europe with smaller than 5, or only very small cell production capacity, no active ingot on wafer production, and only one polysilicon manufacturer. So we've had closed cell manufacturing capacity, for example, Meyer Burger last year, and now Enel is actually the only one larger PV cell manufacturer with a 3-son factory in Catania having cell manufacturing in Europe. If you look in this map on the announcements, so there are quite a few companies who want to re-establish manufacturing in Europe. You see them on the right side. So, and you see in our chart on the top left that there could be potentially, if this announcement would become active, around 10 gigawatt of manufacturing capacity upstream, so ingot wafer, then close to 30 maybe in cell, and above 40 in module manufacturing. So this would be great, but it also depends on what is decided in Europe, that these PV module manufacturers are economically successful, can be successful, and to draw investment capital. So we'll come to this. Because there's also a lot of global production capacity growing outside of Europe and outside of China. Here you see a few charts of different regions in the world with capacity announcement. You see here in orange in the bars what are announcement. We all know that this is not all of them may be realized. But if we see that at the end of the decade, the potential supply from the non-dominant source, how it's called in the NZIA Industry Act, which we have seen is China along the PV supply chain, we have a supply of a factor 2 to 5 up above the EU demand. So we could be supplied from these other countries to Europe to cover our own demand potentially in the future. So reshoring manufacturing has to deal also with potentially imported modules from India, from the Middle East, from Turkey, and especially from Southeast Asia. And we have dived into the cost assessment on this side. So to sum up, solar PV is the cheapest source of electricity. It's constantly growing, but we have a global production overcapacity. That's why we have also very low PV module prices. We come to that. And we see on-site potential alternative supply sources which can cover the EU demand. So how does this impact PV manufacturing projects if we don't have a Made in Europe policy, like it's not the case currently in the NZIA Industry Act? So now we have looked at finance push and demand pull measures. We will focus today on finance push measures. And there are many different measures out there in different countries. We have sorted them in policies. If you get CapEx support, we see some examples like the EU Innovation Fund or investment from the European Investment Bank. You can get OpEx support in your countries. You could get financing support or output-based support, like, for example, the US or India has implemented to support reshoring manufacturing. On the other side, the first introduced were finance push policies for PV manufacturers. Now on the bottom, you see finance push policies for PV owners, operators. So on the system side, on the project side, installing the PV system, we see, for example, the US has an investment tax credit. You can introduce VAT reductions on the CapEx side. On the OpEx side, we have not analyzed. We don't see, as PV is very low OpEx, don't see a big lever there. Financing, of course, can help. And again, also an output-based support, like established, like a feed-in tariff bonus, like has been established in many countries. So now let's dive into the cost analysis. On the left side, you see a chart, and we have done this cost analysis. It's based on a cost analysis we've done together with NREL and RCT Solutions, and we've updated this and tailored this to analyze the different options for this study. And you see in the very left, I draw your attention to the two left bars. We've analyzed the fully EU-made PV module along the PV value chains from the bottom, polysilicon, ingot, wafer, cell, and module production. And we see that if you would reshore everything in a very low-scale PV manufacturer, you would get a minimum sustainable delivered price, so that you don't make losses. But we see we don't have we've put very small earnings into the model, so around 5% net earnings. But still, you would get above 30% in production costs. If you fully scale, and that is our first message, that's key. Manufacturing needs to be scaled to go down in cost. But we still see 25.5% cent per watt peak production cost in Europe. In the middle, you see our minimum sustainable price calculation for Asia, which we see for Southeast Asia, 16.5 for fully in China produced, a little bit lower. And so there's a significant gap. And on the bottom and the right, you see then the current PV module market price. So we see that PV manufacturers selling the PV modules under cost, and it's been going on for over a year now. All the large PV manufacturers, the tier one large manufacturers, have been making high losses. So, and even if you would buy, for example, solar cells from China and would you put in the module, you would not be cost competitive at the current stage. So this is a difficult situation, even for current PV module manufacturers to compete with imported modules. I've said that before, the current price is not sustainable for PV manufacturers. China has started taking action in China for them to make less losses. The PV market price are expected to rise, but when and how large, on how much, this is a question and debate. So now let's dive into cost analysis. So we go from left to right in this graph. We started with this first measure. We need to have a scaled manufacturing capacities in Europe to lower the costs. But we still have a large price gap or cost if you look to the right side. So what can be done? So one measure that could be done, you buy a PV wafer, a silicon wafer from China, which significantly could reduce the cost gap. But this is, of course, not sufficient. So we need policy measures. So we've looked into CapEx support and OpEx support firstly. And we see that if you would support now a PV cell, PV module manufacturing and reduce the CapEx by support by 50%, this does not give much for reducing the cost. The same is also here in OpEx support, where we've analyzed an electricity price reduction. This also does not give much less than 1 cent per watt peak in production cost. So what we find more attractive, and what I've said that before, US and India are doing as an output-based support scheme. We have taken here now an arbitrary number for 1 cent per watt peak for each locally manufactured value stage. So in this case, it would be cell and module. So if this would be the case, it would lower the production cost by 2 cents per watt peak. For example, in the US, we have much higher levels for reducing the production cost, 7 cents for PV module manufacturing, for example. So, but here we've used the lower lever just to say there might be still a gap too close to the current PV module market price. So a gap still remains. And why would we have done this? To look also on the PV system side and to introduce now different levers. So this is the first study. So if there's still a gap, it has to be closed on system level. And this case study here is of course not looking at polysilicon ingot wafer supply. So this also needs to be answered. This dependency in this case study still would remain. So we have to address all PV manufacturing stages in Europe. So showing here, one, what can happen to lower the price gap, and I said that before, prices may increase in China to be more sustainable. How much, we'll have to see. Another lever is then, okay, CapEx support on the system level, and you see this on the right side. So the levelized cost of electricity is on the x-axis and the PV system prices on the y-axis. Often you bid on levelized cost of electricity for a PV auction. So you can use the CapEx to reduce your bid price. You can get financing support to reduce your bid price, or you can get an output-based support and then to close the cost gap, which might remain. So these are the different options which we found that can be introduced either on the manufacturing side or on the PV system side. So now let's look at a more concrete analysis of different module types. Oh, I'm sorry, this slide looks a little bit messed up. It wasn't before on our side, but what we have done, we've looked at different PV module types with made in EU components for each PV module type. So either the full PV value chain, or here the second module is cell, module, and glass, either with polysilicon, module and glass, cell, or none. And you may know that the NZIA Industry Act is not about made in Europe yet, it's about reshoring. So if module fully made in Southeast Asia would still comply for NZIA Industry Act support. So I've not go step by step because of time reasons. So we have looked now what happens if you start, and you see this in the left graph in blue. If you start with PV module, glass, and cell manufacturing, we see that the cost can be reduced to 19 cents per watt, which means that the wafer is bought from China. If you do polysilicon in Europe and everything else, in this case is Southeast Asia, module or glass in Europe or cell in Europe, and we see this range between 15.4 and 19 cents per watt peak as potential production cost in Europe if you comply with EU-made components and you reshore manufacturing for these steps here shown in blue. But if you would buy your module fully Southeast Asian made, or in this case, even the cell, the glass, or the module would comply, being not purchased at the dominating country, which means a wafer could come from China, the other steps manufactured in Southeast Asia. These more imported modules would come with a lower price and would comply with the NZIA Industry Act. So this is a threat for European reshore manufacturing, that modules that comply with the NZIA Industry Act without any EU-made components would be able to be supported under current scheme. And especially important for auctions, we have analyzed for auctions, there's a 15% price gap that countries can opt out of supporting PV manufacturing. So we've analyzed if we start with at least one EU-made component, and that was this section here on the left, if this would still, based on a comparison of a current PV module market price, if this would be in a PV system side, still be in the 15% range. We see, yeah, it can barely be possible, but it can be possible starting with PV module and cell manufacturing in Europe, for example, which is here the left bar with 19 cent per watt peak. So this we call NZIA Industry EU high. Then here the lower case we call EU low. We see about 9.4%, so close to 10% higher PV module price, or no levelized cost of electricity. Sorry for that. But an imported module from Southeast Asia still would win the bid in this case. So the PV modules with at least one EU-made component would be undercut in cost for a PV module, which is NZIA Industry Act compliant and with components made in Southeast Asia. So to sum up, we've done market analysis. NZIA Industry Act compliant PV modules don't require any EU-made PV module components. And PV modules from Southeast Asia are substantially cheaper and can outcompete all options with one or more EU component. This is very important to note. We've done a cost gap analysis, and 50% added cost gap can be sufficient with one or even more EU-made components. So EU manufacturing can comply on that auction side with the NZIA Industry Act. We've also done, and I've not shown this here, you see this in the top right, and please take a look also at the study at Solar Power Europe webpage. We've done how much would it cost to support EU-made PV manufacturing other than the NZIA Industry Act. And we see for the NZIA Industry Act goal of 30 gigawatts manufacturing in Europe, the cost of support would range about 1 to 3.2 billion euros per year. We've also factored in macroeconomic benefits, so tax payments of the companies in this manufacturing, also watts for the additional cost or price of these PV modules. And the final key takeaway of our analysis is that an effective NZIA industry resilience policy scheme is essential and key for reshoring PV manufacturing to Europe. And an Made in EU bonus would be one important policy scheme to support this. There are also other ways, but we think Made in EU bonus is a good way and a very straightforward way to support and reshore PV manufacturing, which is, we believe, is essential also for Europe to keep also the knowledge of manufacturing within Europe, and to support to supply ourselves with PV modules and be resilient in the PV supply chain. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions later, or also send us an email.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for this excellent presentation. It was to the point. It was also interesting to see that the deeper we delved into the analysis, the higher the participation numbers went. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to your entire team who prepared the study for us very diligently and under considerable time pressure. Sebastian, you will stay with us? Yes. Sebastian, you will stay with us for the Q&A session. Otherwise, good afternoon to everyone from my side. It is my pleasure now to guide you through the second part of this webinar. We will now explore in a panel discussion how different companies, countries, and also the European Commission are translating this legislation into action. I invite the audience to submit questions to the Q&A box that we will pick up later on. First, let's kick things off with a little exercise. Don't worry, no push-ups will be required. I'll ask you 5 yes or no questions on the screen. 5 questions will appear on your screen, and you can answer each one with yes or no. If you agree with the question, please click yes. If you do not agree, please click no. And we will review the results together in a minute. So please place your hand on your computer mouse now, and the poll is about to begin. And while you are answering this question, I can recap that you might be aware of the EU has set an ambitious goal of at least 30 gigawatt of European solar PV manufacturing by 2030. And now it's up to the member states to act. So the first question is, are you happy with the Net Zero Industry Act? Second, will the EU reach the 30 gigawatt goal of solar PV manufacturing by 2030? We saw some implications from the manufacturing study. Third question, will non-price criteria and public auctions, renewable energy auctions under the Net Zero Industry Act help European solar manufacturing? Fourth question, has your organization supported or invested in European solar manufacturing? And the last question, do you trust your national government to implement the Net Zero Industry Act well? I give you a couple of more seconds, and then I would ask my colleagues to provide the results. Okay. I think we are ready to see the results. First question, are you happy with the Net Zero Industry Act? It's more or less a 50-50 decision. The majority voted for no, a slight no. Second question, will the European Union reach the 30 gigawatt of solar PV manufacturing by 2030? This gives a clear indication that there's a disbelief that the EU will reach this goal in 4 years. Third question, will non-price criteria and renewable energy auctions help European solar manufacturing? Yes, there's trust in it, with a 65% voted for yes. Fourth question, has your organization supported or invested in European solar manufacturing? We are on a good track with 48%. Still, there could be some improvement. And last question, do you trust your national government to implement the Net Zero Industry Act well? Well, judging by the reaction in the poll, I see that the Net Zero Industry Act has not exactly won the Audience Choice Award. But this is what the panel is for. Thank you to my colleagues for providing the results. And with that, I'd like to open the panel discussions with our dedicated panelists. The first question goes to Jacek Truszyński from the European Commission. Jacek, you have seen the results of the poll. You are very much aware of the Net Zero Industry Act and its implementation. Where do we stand with the implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act? And can you share some best practices with us?
Thanks, Annette, for inviting me, and good afternoon to everyone. I would say it's hard right now to say exactly where we stand with the implementation of those specific provisions that we are discussing today, because the requirements start applying as of January next year. What we know is that often member states have delays in implementing EU law, even when these are regulations, so directly applicable law, often paradoxically still needs to be transposed by member states. And so what we know is that many member states are adapting their different government decrees to make sure that these non-price criteria can be factored in auctions, procurement, and subsidy schemes as of early next year. what we know, as I say, is that member states often indeed have some delays. And, when we look at the Net Zero Industry Act requirements across different dimensions, like permitting, the first deadlines were 1 year ago. And still we can say that 6 member states out of 27 have not applied the rules. But that means that 21 have. So I think it's not such a bad picture that we have. What we can say in terms of best practice is that some member states are front-loading that work and already start applying those rules today, or are about to start applying. I think we will hear today from the Italian colleagues who indeed have a best practice example, and I think the results also there are very interesting in the context of the Fraunhofer study. And what I can tell you is that colleagues from other member states are closely analyzing what Italy has done to see what lessons can be drawn, what measures and solutions could be imported into their frameworks. It's not only Italy. For example, in Lithuania, here we talk about procurement, not auctions, procurement of certain grid equipment. Also, non-price criteria under NZIA are being applied. Several member states are preparing auctions for next year. We know that notably Spain for wind and solar, Romania for solar, Ireland also for auctions for next year are carrying out consultations to see public consultation how to apply those non-price criteria. So I think overall the picture is not that bad, and I think it will be more challenging for procurement because here we talk about many small deals, and also the let's say the cost increase escape clause is more stringent than in auctions. In auctions, we speak about 2-3 big deals per year per member state. So I think also there's scope to scrutinize more closely what member states are planning, advising member states, and also you as the industry, I think, have more scope to advise the governments how to do it properly.
Thank you for sharing the insights. Now, on the European level, Jacek, we hear a lot about Made in EU.
Yes.
Instead of resilience under the Net Zero Industry Act. Can you explain to the audience what this is about?
Okay, happy to do that. Thanks, Annette. So indeed, I think resilience under NZIA is about, as Fraunhofer presented in their study, diversifying away from the dominant source of supply. And in the context of investments, as we just have seen by many other jurisdictions and economies in solar PV production, that means often that those imports from China will be replaced by imports from elsewhere, Turkey, India, or Southeast Asia. And I think in NZIA, there's this tension in terms of the objectives, because on the one hand, the objective is to scale up production in the EU. That's the overall objective of the law. But at the same time, the main, let's say, policy tool, which is very concrete, included in that act, which are those non-price criteria in public schemes, is designed rather at diversifying the supply. So there is this tension, and for certain sectors like batteries, like solar, we have good reason to believe that this tension will mean that the overall objective of scaling up production in the EU could be challenged. And I think that we have seen this in the poll, that I think many of your stakeholders share this view. And in that context, indeed, the Commission is currently looking into what sectors and how could be covered by Made in Europe requirements, and such requirements could be included in some of the upcoming legislative proposals planned for the end of this year.
Thank you for sharing this, Jacek. Then I'd like to move on to Michele from 3Sun Enel. Welcome to join the panel. Michele, going to the implementation side on the business level. In the current market, 3Sun is one of the few manufacturers in Europe that has already started production with its gigafactory in Catania in Italy. And as far as we know, it is the only one to have sufficiently effectively begun. What sets you apart from other companies?
Yes, good morning to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. As you just said, 3Sun during last year, started both the module assembly line and the cell production line. And within these words, you can find what is the real difference of being within the European market of producing cells. I think much of the focus of Trisan was really to concentrate on the technology of producing cell, which is the real innovating for being European, because all the European factories as of today are assembling cells. So we invested in the development, in technology. We chose a technology which is, let me say, different from the main technology stream as of today, because we went to heterojunction technology. The reason for this is because we really think that it's in the cells that we can innovate. We really think that in the cells we can make the difference. And what we would like to do is to step in the next generation of cell. So that's why we chose a different technology. We chose heterojunction because we think it can be closer to the tandem technology, which will really step up in terms of efficiency of a cell. As you said, we just started, so we are operating, we have sold, we have the first project, so we have a first installation of module with our cells, so everything is going in the right direction. We still need to scale up, but clearly, I think it was said at the beginning, in order to scale up, we need to have comfort on a stable market. You know, a gigafactory like Trisan, you cannot modulate production. Once you start, you have to produce. You cannot go up and down because you have people, you have machines that need to go always running. And therefore, we need to see this discussion is right on the focus, because we need a long-term market to consolidate our production.
Michele, and jumping on this from your business experience, what would be needed to remain competitive in the European and in the Italian market?
Well, to be very direct, I don't think, you know, from an industrial point of view, European will ever be competitive with Chinese production, no? They have economies of scales that we will never reach. We can have a breakthrough in terms of technology that will bring us to be more competitive and closer to the Chinese, because I think an increase in terms of efficiency, like the tandem technology, would bring immediately a reduction on the cost. But in terms of framework in which we work, we know that you know, we don't see in the next coming years, at least until 2030, the possibility of being more competitive on a cost base with the Chinese, because of economies of scales, because of all the material that we still need to buy from China. This was mentioned in the introduction. You know, they have a technology also within the lingot production. So I think, you know, it's very hard to become competitive in this situation. So we really think that, you know, this NZIA direction is the correct one. So trying to create a competitive framework with companies which work on the same rules. Because this is the idea. You always need to create competition, because it's the only way you can push innovation and increase of efficiency. So you should never go on a subsidy-based strategy, because that would stop, you know, trying to be more efficient. We like competition. We want to be in a competitive environment, and I think NZIA goes into that direction. Regarding what I heard mentioning, and which is the real question mark on the table, which is the made in EU bonus, or, you know, pre-qualification criteria, whatever, I think is really necessary, because I'm sure, you know, you will talk about it, but Italy was the first mover in this, in the NZIA implementation. It was still not, you know, obliged to apply it, but there was a step on by the Italian government. I think it was a perfect step forward by the Italian government, because it created a very competitive environment. And there is already some estimation on the cost that came out from this tender, which are very good. So they made a very good service to the overall system, because the cost at which the energy will be produced will be lower than the average cost for the Italian consumers. So I think it's a very positive step. Regarding the manufacturing, though, we really need to create a competitive environment within European companies. And this goes for Trisan, and goes the same for all the, I think, you know, we have exponents that will say themselves, but I see all the projects that you see in Europe of new gigafactories, they're all waiting for the legislative framework in order to
Yes.
put and limit competition within Europe.
Thanks for sharing the insights, Michele. I'd like to stay on the sunny side of Italy. We also now have Alessandro Noce from the Italian Ministry joining. Alessandro, welcome to the panel discussion. You are representing the Italian Ministry in charge of the resilience implementation. So how do you assess the FERX framework in Italy?
Yes, thanks, Annette. Thanks for the invitation. And yes, I mean, as the colleague from Trisan was saying, we are maybe, I would say, the one to implement this auction with the Net Zero Industry Act pre-qualification criteria for solar energy in Europe. We are currently still in the auction. The final result will be released in mid-December. What I can say is that out of 1.6 gigawatt of demand, we had of 157 offers for a total 1.85 gigawatt, which is a good result. And as was underlined before, what is the likely price which will be awarded is well under the actual wholesale price of electricity in Italy, although it's higher than the price which will be awarded in the auction without non-price criteria. So far so good, but you know, my judgment, which must be confirmed after the final result will be released of this auction, is that you know, as the resilience criteria actually works at the moment, the Net Zero Industry Act seems to be a good tool to guarantee a diversification of supply and so decrease the dependence from one source rather than really helping developing a European industry. Because, you know, the difference in competition between European panels, and not only Chinese, but also other countries, for sure India in this situation, is so big that if we, as we did for the sake of time, because we didn't have enough time to apply all the pre-qualification criteria contained in the regulation, but if you apply only the resilience criteria and you just, you know, copycat the regulation into the auction rules, and so the price is one of the main or the only driver of the auction, you have that even if you how can I say, close the Chinese door, there are other doors that could be opened, India, for instance, and then the results is a diversification of supply, which is something in order to reduce dependence, but it is not a strong industrial policy tool for the European industry. So the question I ask myself is, and maybe we will have the proof of that in the near future, because we as Italy, we are in the process of negotiating with the European Commission for a new scheme with all the criteria, the pre-qualification. We choose the pre-qualification criteria of the Net Zero Industry Act. So I'm just referring not only on the resilience, but also on the cybersecurity, the responsible firm conduct, the sustainability, and so on. I wonder whether the application of all those criteria would work better than the resilience only in guaranteeing you know, the possibility that given this price difference, which, as it has been correctly said, won't be reduced, we will have the power to reach the aim that the same regulation pose, which is a very strong target, 40% of a European net zero industry target by 2030. So that's my first evaluation.
And could you give an outlook, because we are aware of that the FEREX framework falls under the temporary crisis and transition framework. Will there be a continuation from next year on?
Yes, correct. We will have a new scheme. We will also call the FEREX, but without the transitory before. And in those scheme, we will have net zero industry tax criteria. We are choosing for having separate auction each year for a certain amount of quantity, and we are thinking of applying those criteria either at the solar plants but also at the wind plants. And we are actually working with the Commission in order to have this scheme approved in the shortest time possible.
Thanks for sharing. One last question, since we're also talking about member states implementation, and we know that Italy went ahead. Would you say that there's a lesson that other member states can take from the Italian experience in scaling up solar manufacturing in Europe?
I think I will be able to give a full answer to your question after the final results, and when we will have the exact amount of panels, to be really honest, which will arrive from India, maybe, rather than other countries, or from Europe. If, as I suspect, the biggest share of the panels will come from India, for instance, I would say that we have to think maybe to this lesson in order to work with the Commission to better understand how we can actually really help the European industry to grow in this sector.
Thanks for sharing. I'm looking forward to the final analysis. Now, I'd like to move on to Nicolas Chandelier from Carbon. Welcome to the panel discussion. Nicolas, we heard Teresa and Inel's, let's say, experience and Alessandro's, let's say, the Italian experience on the implementation. Tell us a bit about the state of your factory of Carbon. And also, we are curious to get a better understanding about the value chain integration.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, sorry, everybody. So what is Carbon about? Carbon is it's part of this reshoring project to address the 30 gigawatt objective by 2030 of made in Europe PV. So Carbon is about 3 plants, not one plant. The first plant is a pilot plant, about 500 plus megawatt of module assembly, which will be our pilot plant, and with the objective of starting that by the end of 26. The second plant is a 5 gigawatt plant of module and cell manufacturing, with the objective to start in 28. And the second gigafactory is ingot and wafer, 5 gigawatt plant to be started by 2030. Really our objective here, and that's about this value chain integration, which is a key concept that we want to integrate into Carbon, because our aim is really to create an industry sector which will be able to supply part of the European demand in PV independently from many other regions in the world. So of course, that's why we want, and we've made a clear choice to integrate also ingot and wafer as part of our project. Now, maybe a question is, how are we going to be able, and what are the key principles as part of our manufacturing strategy to be able to be successful in this objective. First, we're speaking about gigafactory. We have Enel as an example. Also a project, we need this size to absorb the fixed cost and be price competitive on the long term. So that's one component that we're applying. We put this vertical integration and we include ingot and wafer really as part of our project. And today we have, by the way, sorry, I forget to mention about where we are. We have secured the land, we have the permitting, which is secured for both the cell module, but also the ingot and wafer. We have secured the utilities, so we're ready to go. We've put this vertical integration for us, I think is key, because we don't want to depend from an outside of Europe source for ingot and wafer, which could put our cost very variable. Okay, we know the cost today. We don't know what the cost of product imported, where we don't have the know-how anymore in Europe for ingot and wafer, how much it will be. The third point, what I want to put is some partnership. Okay, I think this is a concept of we want to go fast. I think, yes, still it's 28, 2030, but this is fast to build gigafactory and to rebuild know-how in the manufacturing in Europe. This is fast, and we consider that we want to have the help of people who are doing it today. Okay, meaning to build partnership with players, Chinese players, okay, to get some know-how transfer to be able to go fast and to achieve the target of 2030, being able to produce at a competitive cost and meeting the timeline. The last point is a pilot site. Okay, you hear me saying, okay, we want to put a 500 megawatt. Okay, why is that? This is not absolutely required. For us, we think that to be able to achieve being able to run between now and 28, 5 gigawatt of module and cell manufacturing in such a short time frame with a high level of quality and performance of cell at a competitive price, we need to pilot some of the activities. The piloting, for sure, it's a module assembly, it's not the cell, but we want to pilot the partnership. When we speak about building a partnership with another player, we need to learn how to work together before we go for directly to the gigafactory. We need also to pilot our supply chain. Most of the raw materials are on the module assembly, the glass, the frame, etc., etc. So we want to do that and take the time on a small scale manufacturing to put that. We want to pilot the digital parts, the MES system. So there are many components here, and also we will need to recruit and train a lot of people in a very short period of time. By having a first project located close to the gigafactory, this will really help us to be able to achieve the industrial ramp up into a short period of time with meeting the expected financial metrics of the gigafactory.
Thanks for sharing. And we heard Jacek's explanation on the Made in EU criterion consideration in upcoming EU legislation. For you as a manufacturer, what do you see as the key enablers to make EU-made solar competitive globally? Is it access to finance? Is it stable demand signals or regulatory clarity such as Made in EU criterion?
Okay. I think we need all. The question is not too much what do we need. We need everything. The question is how it's going to happen. Okay. And I think at the beginning, this has to start with a very clear regulation where Made in Europe is written, it's embedded, it's sustainable, it cannot be changed. Okay. As long as we don't have a Made in Europe into the policy that will secure the market, 30 gigawatt as expressed, there will be nobody, no private investor will put €1 into the new gigafactory project. The non-produce in China is securing the resilience of the supply chain, let's say by Alessandro, by Michele, but to finance this new mega factory project, carbon, but I'm sure the others are the same, we need a very clear Made in Europe written, embedded, enforceable, and financed. Okay, this is the beginning of financing the gigafactory project. We can finance a pilot plant, but we will not go further without this Made in Europe. And this is the beginning, because once we have this Made in Europe, then we will be able to raise the necessary offtake to secure the demand of the gigafactory project. And with this secured offtake, we will be able to go to the banking, to the financing, the private, okay, to raise the 1 billion euro that we need to go after and to build our gigafactory project. So for me, there is absolutely no question. Without Made in Europe very clear, okay, there will be no financing for gigafactory project in the future. And this Made in Europe, I understand and I know there is a private and public sector. The public sector is not enough to feed the demand of the gigafactory production. So Made in Europe only for private, or for public sector, sorry, is good, of course, we take it, but far from being sufficient to finance the gigafactory project. We need Made in Europe into the private sector as well for the auction, I mean. Now we can also develop, if we have time, but there is a bonification versus eligibility. We need to take to be aware that the price, as mentioned by the study from the Fraunhofer, you see that there is a current price and there is a real price, cost of production. By having this criterion of bonification versus the pricing with a 30% weight, it's very difficult to be able to engage and confirm that our production will be profitable with that. We're a strong advocate to put some eligibility criteria versus bonification to this Made in Europe for some market. Okay, and the last point, maybe from a regulation perspective, let's put the wafer as well at some points into the regulation as a mandatory criteria. Again, if we don't have the full value chain, okay, there is very limited benefits of having part of the panel manufactured in Europe. We will still be on a dependency of Asia because we've lost completely the know-how of manufacturing ingot and wafer as well in Europe.
Thanks for sharing the insights from, let's say, from the French side, Nicolas. Now we are covering, or we want to cover the entire solar value chain. So I'd like to move on to Fredrik Andrins Sandberg. Welcome to the panel discussion from RWE. Fredrik, what is your and your company's assessment on the Net Zero Industry Act, particularly on non-price criteria in renewable energy auctions from a developer's perspective? We've heard now a lot about manufacturers and from the policymakers, but we also like to hear the developer's perspective.
Thank you so much, Annette, and thank you for also inviting me to this panel. Greatly appreciated. So, first of all, I just like to zoom out a bit. So, I mean, when we look at this market overall, I mean, the main reason for deploying renewable energy is, of course, that we need to reduce the reliance on imported energy from elsewhere, right? So in Europe, we're now importing roughly 58% of all our fuels from abroad, and this needs to change. So that's sort of the overall policy goal. But it is, of course, not the only policy goal. We also need, I mean, as we saw from this report from Fraunhofer, we see that it is very much warranted to diversify our upstream supply as well of solar panels and other models and so on. And here we see that, I mean, to do this efficiently, we simply need to have a lot of simplicity. So the fear that we see now, I mean, we do believe that the NZIA, the Net Zero Industry Act, is well intended. It is going after the right things, but there's a lot of complexity in it. And also we are a bit fearful that we get 27 different interpretations of it, and that will not be very, very, very efficient. Then we get supply chain bubbles. We don't get the scale we actually need to develop this industry in Europe. But of course, we are very much welcoming a diversification of the supply chain and that we get more manufacturing within Europe. That is a good thing. But also, as many of the panelists have said, and also what is very well shown in this Fraunhofer report, is that there's simply a gap in the market in terms of the cost, and this needs to be covered somehow. So either you push on the, you would subsidize the manufacturing as such, or you do it on the demand side. And there we see at least that when we are now implementing this Net Zero Industry Act, this will come with additional cost, and this needs to be taken into account. So it needs to come with a CFD, it needs to come with higher bid limits and so on. Otherwise, we don't think it will be very, very effective.
Thanks for sharing. And just to complement the study we conducted with Fraunhofer ISIS, great support. Not only has the outcome that we asked for a swift implementation of the Net Zero Industry Act on the member states level, because we just have 4 years left with Made in EU bonus points, but also the analysis and policy impact simulation indicated that we need an additional finance instrument for the solar PV sector, an output-based support scheme to narrow down the cost gap. Frederick, from your developer's point of view, can you give insights on what drives your procurement choices? Is it cost? Is it reliability? Is it sustainability? Or is it resilience?
All of the above. So I'll say, first of all, it is not only based on cost, for sure. So, I mean, so resilience, sustainability, living up to ethical standards and all these, it's simply a keyhole you need to fit into. Otherwise, we would be interested. But after that, it of course comes down very much to cost. I mean, we are in a very competitive environment. We need to win auctions, and therefore we need to have a competitive supply chain. That is just the fact. But we would welcome, a key part of this is as well the resilience. I mean, we are very much active in the Solar Industry Alliance. We co-signed the EU Solar Charter and so on. So I mean, we would support ramping up the supply chain in Europe, and we do collaborate with European manufacturers for this. But at the same time, we shouldn't lose speed in the energy transition as such. So we see it a bit of a sort of tiered approach. So we want to see that we get a more diversification of our supplier base outside of the dominant source, as Many is gently putting it, and then also to have more, to be concrete, in Europe. But the cost gap has to be filled and plugged somehow.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you to all the panelists for your insightful discussion. We've heard a wide range of perspective that also showed consent to the results of the manufacturing study by Fraunhofer-ISE from manufacturers, policymakers, and developers. Sebastian from Fraunhofer-ISE will now rejoin us, and we will now open the floor for questions from the audience. If you haven't done so already, please submit your questions through the Q&A box. I see that a couple of questions already have been submitted. So let's take the first question. And I will read it out. I think the one value-adjusted levelized cost of electricity are recommended to be used instead of LCOE as cost indicator, because they include all direct technology costs combined with the estimated value of 3 services provided to the systems: energy, flexibility, and capacity, reference to the International Energy Agency. I think this is a question to Fraunhofer-ISE. Sebastian, could you give us an assumption on that?
Yes, thank you. So I think this is one step further in the energy system integration. So first is the basic levelized cost of electricity analysis. What is the cost gap? And we just change the PV module price and analysis and see the impact of manufacturing directly on the system. And then this question is then drawing also on the business case. I mean, on the private sector, what are you exchanging your rooftop system with? Maybe in Germany with 35 euro cents per kilowatt hour. So then, of course, you have a much higher arbitrage. So there are very different business cases with batteries, without, and integration in the PV systems. I think this is, of course, a very important question, but I think it's going one step too far from what we have analyzed here.
Thanks for the answer. Then I see another question which is directed to Jacek Trzynski from the European Commission. Though explained in the beginning, the question is, what examples are there from member states for implementing Article 25, so non-price criteria and public procurement, Article 26, non-price criteria and renewable energy auctions, and Article 28, other forms of subsidies of the Net Zero Industry Act. We know about the FEREX in Italy and some measures in France, the reduced VAT, but are there more? Jacek, I remember you shared a couple of in the beginning, but yeah, I'm directing this question again to you if you have more examples in mind.
Thanks, Annette, and thanks for the question. I think we have quite a few examples, but they are often at a draft stage. They are, government plans that are being consulted with stakeholders. So, for example, there's a heat pump subsidy scheme in Poland that is undergoing public consultation. There's also heat pump subsidy in Belgium. There is a subsidy scheme for solar in France. Of existing schemes, there's indeed the Italian scheme that we heard about. There's on procurement, there is something in Lithuania with respect to grids that integrates resilience criteria, and several member states are consulting on auction schemes for next year for non-price criteria, notably Romania, Spain, Ireland, and I know that also Germany is looking into that. What I can say is that we are compiling all of that info, and we have to see in what form we would like to possibly make it public. The aim is indeed here to provide transparency and help governments learn from each other. So we are compiling that, and at some point, in some form, we will be sharing it, but I can't tell you today when and how.
Yeah. But this is a great idea to share all the implementation examples and the status for transparency and exchange. Yeah. Thank you for the answer. Then I think this next question is also related to Jacek again. There's a question about Made in EU, which is understood as a form of local content requirement, which when applied would restrict subsidy access and would be a breach with the EU's international trade commitments under WTO rules. How would the European Commission square that circle?
I think whether you talk about subsidy schemes or procurement or auctions, there are different rules under international law that apply. And within each of those frameworks, there are ways of discriminating while being in line with the basic rules. But you're right that in the case of subsidies for consumers, this possibility is quite restricted under WTO rules. But I'm not a WTO lawyer, so I can't tell you exactly if and what ways there are out of that. What I can say is that the Net Zero Industry Act got around that issue by indeed focusing A, on diversification, and B, on targeting cases of proven security of supply situation, with this high dependency on a single source of supply. Now, as we move more towards Made in Europe, we might have different solutions and different arguments, but I can't tell you today what they will be. Just also an observation that, all major economies apply it. Yeah, I mean, there's not as much attention to WTO rules as it was in the past.
Thanks for sharing, Jacek. Then there's one question which I think is addressed to Alessandro from the Italian Ministry. If understood correctly, no Made in EU criteria will be introduced in the final Italian FEREX decree for Net Zero Industry Act auctions. Is that correct?
I mean, we are still in the process of deciding if we what we we will do what is allowed by the European regulation. And according to my knowledge, maybe I would ask the colleague from the Commission to confirm that it's not possible to put an explicit Made in Europe criteria at the moment. We have to work with existing rules in order to define and design the criteria in order to get this result. I remember that during the negotiation in 2024 on the regulation, we, Italy, as other country, explicitly made a quest for introducing an explicit Made in Europe criteria in the regulation, but this at the end didn't succeed. So we will do what is allowed at the existing rule, and in order to make something which is against the European law is something which is outside the scope of my competence. It's something that is political, and I'm not here. I'm not able to respond on a political side.
Fully understood. Jacek, is there something what you would like to complement?
No, I can just confirm that indeed there's nothing in the Net Zero Industry Act that would require or allow member states to do already now made in Europe. But of course, there's also nothing in NZIA that would not allow it. But member states are subject to WTO rules. And in that sense, they have to be mindful when setting such requirements of to what extent they are compatible with those international obligations. And as I said, the Commission is currently carefully analyzing that issue because we, as the President of the Commission announced, will be setting made in Europe requirements for specific products very soon, or rather we will be proposing to member states and the European Parliament to have such requirements. And in that sense, our lawyers are looking into how such requirements could be framed in a way that is somehow compatible with WTO. And I believe once we will table that proposal, even though it will not be law yet, but just a proposal from the Commission, it will already give a reference to member states that they could use potentially when they want to, let's say, front load the application of such rules into their national frameworks.
And Jacek, may I jump in here? Are you considering, if you can disclose, also to reopen the Net Zero Industry Act, or will it be rather in the new upcoming EU legislation? Because we see this overlap between Article 25 Net Zero Industry Act on the public procurement, and then the revision of the Public Procurement Directive, which we believe needs to be somewhat harmonized.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex picture because we have requirements applicable under the Net Zero Industry Act. Soon we will have the Industrial Accelerator Act tabled in December, which will most probably include made in Europe requirements. We don't know yet for what products and sectors, but it will include some sectors will be covered. And then next year, we will have the review of the public procurement legislation. So it all has to somehow work well with one another. I think I can't comment now on the public procurement legislation revision, but I can say that with respect to the Industrial Accelerator Act, our aim is not to disrupt what was already agreed under NZIA, because if we now say we replace NZIA with Made in Europe, I mean, what incentive do member states have to implement those rules? Right. So we want to keep what is already acquired and complement it in a targeted way when justified with made in Europe requirements on top.
Thanks for sharing, Jacek. Then the next question, I think, goes to Tristan, Enel, and to Carbon. What role do the existing or potential manufacturers play in the promotion of EU domestic content? For example, what role does Tristan, Enel played in the promotion of non-price criteria in Italy? What role does Carbon or other manufacturers are playing or are going to play for the same in France?
I'll go first. So
yes,
I think the role that we played in the Italian situation was just to make aware of our conditions. So to show that there is a presence of Chinese, there is a presence of Southeast Asian producers. That's why that is our role, to show what happens on the market, try to make institutions understand what's happening on the market in order to make sure that the rules obtain the objective for which they're posed. I think Alessandro Noce said, something very true. If the NZIA target was to differentiate from China, it works. If the target is also to support European manufacturing, it doesn't work. So this is our role, I think, as industry player, to show what are our costs, to show what is our, production line, to make institutions understand the technology and our limits as well, in terms of cost, in terms of competition, no? In such a way, they can legislate in order to achieve a target.
Yes, to add on what Michele, and we do the same, of course, I think we have a key role. I think there is, of course, the political objective of NZIA at a European level with member states. There is Execution Act as a regulatory compliance with World Trade Organization and so on. And there is the reality of the manufacturing. What does it mean? Okay, and I think thanks to this study from Fraunhofer, but we can also go a step further than Fraunhofer, and we are going a step further as a producer with very detailed business case, cost, what do we need, and what is the value we're adding as well to the system, to the country, and to Europe. Okay, because of course one component which I think I love this study from Fraunhofer, but we're missing is the value of putting manufacturing in a country. Okay, you're going to create thousands of jobs. And this is not an employment you're going to have to pay, which is not incurred into the economic model of Fraunhofer, which has a huge impact, has a positive impact of localization of the manufacturing. Just a small example. So we help to make it concrete. We help also to explain the regulation impact we're having or not. My comment of putting this made in Europe now, it's a key one. Okay, there is a financier of this industry that will not come if it's not written made in Europe for private auction. If it's only public, this is not going to happen. It's just a fact, and we make it concrete to the regulator. So that when regulation is published, countries can really understand the impact it will have, of course, on the global market, but also on this segment of the manufacturer that Europe wants to build.
Maybe just a compliment that we have an image in the study conducted by Fraunhofer ISE that indicates the macroeconomic benefits that a full or partially European production chain brings to Europe in terms of job and economic wealth or growth. I think I'll take, let's say, just a few more questions and then we do the closing. There is one question dedicated to Fraunhofer ISE. Does the study take into account the potential impact on renewable energy deployment resulting from your proposed measures? Have you taken into account the impact on innovation? And exactly, have you analyzed the potential impact on new growth? Sebastian.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have not analyzed the direct impact on the deployment in the end. One comment is that the impact on the levelized cost of electricity is below 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So, and I think also on a private household, I think it doesn't make a difference. In the end, it's very small. There's other decisions for made in Europe. On the larger private sector, of course, this does make a difference, even the small, because you're a large quantity. But I don't expect that if we have this a market which is same for all, that the impact will be significant. Honestly, on innovation, I think this is then even more deeper into the field. I think this can even drive innovation on the European side. We have many in the research institutes, many technologies and also developments which have not brought to market, which could also reduce costs because we have not sent them to China or not introduced them to China because we are public funded institutes. We don't work with large Chinese companies together, but we didn't have too much also impact within Europe because the market is too small. So there's still a lot of knowledge within Europe that can support PV manufacturing and can also drive innovation also in many steps in PV manufacturing to put European development, European research into manufacturing. I strongly believe that we can drive further innovation in Europe and develop new and better technologies and reduce costs also in towards tandem technologies in the future. There's a lot we have in our pockets to bring to the market, definitely.
Thank you for the reply. And then one question to Jacek, which I already also had asked before. What if or what action will the European Commission take on member states that do not implement the Net Zero Industry Act non-price criteria and public tenders at all?
I mean, you know, the Commission has can apply carrot and stick. So I think we will first go with the carrot, encourage member states to do that. And as I said, because auctions are few, I think we have a good chance of targeting those clearly and identifying early on issues. And we also count on the industry to flag this up to us. It's always faster and easier. If member states do not redress the situation, then there's a process of infringing member states, also with specific steps. And I cannot prejudge now whether we will have to or not. I believe that we can work with the carrot. At least this is what we will try first. And if it doesn't work, we will go with the stick.
Yeah. Thank you. Very clear. And the last question I would open to all panelists. There's the question in the chat. Should regulation encourage making new content requirements in specific segments of the solar PV sector, for example, in rooftop PV, commercial industrial PV, to create targeted markets for supporting the growth of EU manufacturers? Does anybody has a thought on that?
Well, if I can give you just
Yes.
a view on that, as Trisan, we have different module sizing. So some are dedicated to the consumer business, some to the B2B on rooftop, and some for the utility scale. I think the three different markets represent different kind of help that they need. Probably, I think it was said in the study, but in the domestic market, the price difference is almost not perceived. So I think there it's more like, in the domestic market, it's more like a campaign supporting Made in Europe rather than strong and hard incentives. Like instead, on the opposite side, on the utility scale, investors look at the millésimum penny they spend on the investment because they do it for a return. So between these two extremes, I think you can find different kind of incentives that can work properly. Just to make an example, in Italy, we, on top of the FERX, we had also the Transizione 5.0, which supported European panels, which is a different mechanism based on tax reduction. And I think it worked pretty well. So I think it's depending on the segment of the market, you can tailor the subsidy in order to make it work for the investor that is representing that segment. I think this is how it can work better. You should not look at the producers, but you should look at the owner of the final owner of the panels, which is the best solution for him.
Thank you for jumping in and sharing your insight. Now, I'd like to close this webinar. First of all, if you would like to have a look in the entire study, you can find them on our website, solarpowereurope.org. Look for Reshoring Solar Manufacturing to Europe. Today's presentation and the discussion showed that Europe's ambition to scale up solar manufacturing is needed, and that we all, industry policymakers, and member states, are all essential part of this collective effort. If you want to join future events of Solar Power Europe, you can visit our website. You see the scan on the screen. I'd also like to raise attention to an upcoming event in 2 weeks with a great agenda on sustainability. It's our flagship event, the Sustainable Solar Europe event, taking place in person in Brussels on the 3rd of December, the entire day. You're invited to sign up for this. And if participants are not a member of Solar Power Europe yet, you're strongly invited to reach out to us or to my colleagues from the business development team. Solar Power Europe is the leading European solar association and energy storage association. You get great visibility. Feel free to join Solar Power Europe. On behalf of Solar Power Europe, I would like to thank all our speakers for your valuable contributions, for the time you dedicated for today's webinar, all of you for joining us, to the participants, and for engaging so actively. And I wish you a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Have a nice
Thank you.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.